Bank of America is the one I've been saying forever. I think they're going to sacrifice. And if in a world where you're trying to cull the banks and move to a CBDC, you got to get rid of a lot of the banks. How do you do that? Bring down a biggie like Bank of America and watch what happens. Everyone will run to yank their money out, and it'll jack the price of commodities way higher. It'll blow up the banks. It will create a panic moment where now is the time for the CBDC to be rolled in on a white horse. Just take it and we'll make you whole. I know you lost everything, but that's what a CBDC is. It's modern monetary theory. We don't even have to collect taxes if we don't want to, and we can just print your way to prosperity. So I think they're going that way. If you look at the GDP of the world and take the countries that make 99% of it, they all have a CBDC in development or operation. It's coming. They don't do that just for shits and giggles. It's coming.
Connection established.
Welcome back, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are here for another episode of the Silver Stacking Podcast with yours truly and the CEO of Miles Franklin, which is Andy Shectman. We have gold and silver specials every single Monday. Right now, we have kangaroos for $2.99 over spot. We have buffalo rounds, $2.35. So many different great prices. You can email me, slayer@milesfranklin.com, or call me 330-485-6172. I will take care of you. My phone's on 24/7. Hit me up whenever. I'll make sure you're taken care of. I'm not a stingy guy. So, Andy, it is good to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, my man. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I really am. A lot of things are going on right now, but trying to stay optimistic and I guess, just keep on pushing, because it's very easy to get distracted to all the noise and kind of lose track and, get caught up in a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, it is. And I found it, easier to focus on the forest rather than the trees. That's a trite statement, but I mean it. I mean, in terms of the distractions that are everywhere, they'll drive you insane. You have to kind of focus on the big picture. And that's kind of driven me over the last several years. And what is the big picture? And, I think if you look at, like, for example, the way that the BRICS are doing things, they're seeing the big picture. They're not focusing on the minutia that a lot of us get caught up in. And I think, some of that's by design, of course, the distractions. Look over here, don't look over here. See the big picture, and life becomes a lot easier, I think. And don't sweat the small stuff, they say, and if you do sweat the small stuff, you miss out on too much that is happening right in front of you, and including the good things. So yeah, I get it, man. It's one of these times with the BRICS meeting coming up next week, the election, and all of the chaos we've seen over the last several years. You're a father, you're raising a family. It's not easy nowadays, and it's easy to get caught up. So I think that maybe that's what's allowed me to see some things a little bit clearly, is that I try and tune out and block out the noise and focus on the big picture, which seems to be getting bigger every day.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings is, we missed the beauty of the forest because we were diverted to the ugliness of its trees.
Right.
And I'm someone who always focuses on the macro anyways. Like, I talk to people every day, all day long, and I see the ones that are emotionally attached to markets, that are investing with their heart, not their head. I always say invest with your head, not your heart, right? A lot of these people, they're emotional, like if silver goes down a couple pennies one day, they're panicking or freaking out or second guessing themselves. And then you'll see the people who don't care. They're like, right now, what are your prices? You got some specials? Okay. If not, silver's down. Okay, cool. You can see the two different types of people, right? Like, imagine you have two different investors. One is cool, calm, collect. The other guy is very finicky, panicking, always, worried. Which one of those two people you think is going to be the successful one? The guy that's cool, calm, and collect, right? So I try to, it's hard right now with things as crazy as they are, but when it comes to investing, it's all decision making, right? It literally breaks down to your psyche. It's all decision making. So if you're someone who's very, worried and always freaking out with the littlest things, it's gonna affect your profits.
Well, that's why they have a whole school of investment ideology called wave theory, and Elliott wave, Kondratiev wave, which centers on human emotions that drive the markets. And, let's just be honest, it's easier said than done to not get emotional when your investment is cratering or when your investment's going to the moon. And it's like I tell, anyone who's ever had a commission only job, I would say, look, part of being successful in that is realizing you're not as good as you think you are when you're killing it, and you're not as bad as you think you are when you're getting killed and you're not making anything and business is slow. It's balance. And the same thing is true here, is that human emotions is something as old as time. And that's why there is a whole school of investment theory and investment ideology centered specifically on the emotions of human beings. And that's it's a tough thing to do, to not become emotional. It really is, especially in things that are as emotional as your savings, your investments, your future, as it relates to money. So yeah, I get that, man.
That's very interesting. I never heard of I guess I've heard of the Elliott wave theory, but I never looked into or heard of like the actual school of it. So this is something I kind of dug into the last couple days, and people were very interested in it. It's talking about silver hitting all-time highs in all these different global currencies. So right now, silver's at an all-time high in the Indian rupee, the Russian ruble, the Australian dollar, the African rand. It's just inches below its all-time high in the Canadian dollar, the euro, and the British pound is close to hitting all-time highs. And there's a few others. Like what is going on? And do you think that the US dollar is next?
No, it did that with gold for a very long time before it broke out in dollars. And yeah, I do think you'll see it ultimately break out in dollars. It just goes to show that the unjustified inordinate strength of the dollar is blurring the role that silver and gold actually perform. Um, and again, for almost a year, gold had reached all-time highs against almost every currency on the planet except the U.S. dollar. And that's kind of the problem, is that it's doing its job in every other country. People see it for what it is. Um, and this is why so many people here in the United States don't see it for what it is. And I think that will change, of course. Um, it's just that our media doesn't do a good job of telling us these kinds of things. They have to hear it from you instead. And we're talking to the pimple on the elephant's ass. We're not talking to the elephant. And if the elephant actually understood these kinds of things, maybe they wouldn't only think that the road to retirement is paved with mutual funds and stock certificates. Why did if it's such a small, insignificant market, that being silver, why did the Wall Street Journal come out and write a report about the fact that that there is this talk of a growing silver short, and that there's enough silver in the vaults to push that off? But it doesn't talk about the fact that the majority of the silver in these vaults is owned already. It's not for sale. It's owned by the ETFs, or even the silver in the register, or the eligible category on COMEX is silver that belongs to people like me or my clients or a hedge fund or Tesla or an industrial that makes solar panels. They're not for sale. And so it's almost like nothing to see here. Keep moving on. If it's such an insignificant thing, why just even write about it at all? And I think the same thing is true here, is that silver is really important. People around the world are beginning to see that. And maybe that's why you see India importing it to the degree that they are. And look, we're going to have another 265 million ounce deficit this year, 1.1 billion ounce deficit over the last 6 years.
That's
And
so
when you
crazy.
talk about value, if you look at the M2 money supply, it's up 14 times since 1980, and gold is trading at a 40% discount to its 1980 high, and the money supply is up 14-fold. Look at everything else, and most of it you'll find is commensurate with that money creation in terms of how much more things cost today than in 1980, except for silver. And when you realize that they're trading 3.5 times annual global mine supply per year on the LBMA, it's all paper. How much of that can they trade till they get called on the carpet, and request delivery? How much can they do? And I think it's this kind of price suppression that's keeping the people in the West asleep. The rest of the world sees it because the dollar is unjustifiably strong and shouldn't be as strong as it is. And they're beginning to notice, hey, maybe there is something to owning something strategic like gold and silver. The people in the U.S. will find out last when the dollar really starts to fall. It hasn't happened yet, but I do believe it's inevitable. Certainly, with the global de-dollarization, with the money creation, with the fiscal irresponsibility that's coming. You put that together with the massive amount of paper trading on COMEX and the LBMA according or in coordination with the massive deliveries where we saw 8.1% of all the silver on the LBMA delivered in the month of August. These countries understand it, and they're trying to accumulate it at these stupid prices because they know the West is playing a game that ultimately they can't win, and they're trapped. The commercial banks are trapped. And if they try and cover these prices, it pushes the price way, way, way higher. And with the short positions that they have in London right now, in fact, let me just see, the short positions in London right now are 4 to 6 billion ounces that the commercial banks have. Every dollar increase, if they try to cover on COMEX and push the price up, every dollar increase is $4 to $6 billion loss on the LBMA to these commercial banks. And
Jeez.
this is a big number. And the difference is that the COMEX is an exchange where you have an actual exchange that can come in and try and make things right. The LBMA is over the counter. There is no exchange. You just could see a massive default where these people who think they own silver end up getting completely and totally screwed. And it would take down with it some of the biggest Western bullion banks on the planet. So all of this suppression and inordinate dollar strength has kept people here in the West thinking that silver is an archaic relic of the past, which is allowing India and China and the rest of Russia now carte blanche to buy this stuff hand over fist at subsidized prices. You think there's any coincidence? India's bought 800 million ounces. You think there's any coincidence that China, which is at least the #2 largest producer of silver in the world, if not #1, is flying all around the world, according to our friend Sean Kun, buying unrefined silver and in concentrate and doré? And do you think there's any coincidence that now Russia is making a official state policy to accumulate silver for their state fund? No, it's not. And they're using the suppression of the Western market. These banks are trapped to do so, and they are trapped. So ultimately, price goes much, much higher, probably not at the behest or the wishes of the West, but the market is stronger than the ability of these banks to hold it down because you can stand for delivery. And if you're trading 4 to 6 billion ounces of silver, you got these banks that are short. Well, how much of the 300 million ounces that are actually available for delivery, according to the LBMA, is really available for delivery, standing behind 4 to 6 billion ounces that could stand for delivery? So it's not a good thing. And ultimately, this kind of manipulation, just like all before it, ultimately die. So have patience and stick-to-itiveness, as my 6th grade teacher used to say. Hang on, stick to your gut, have strong fingertips, and don't let go, because when this breaks, it'll be something to behold.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into the next thing I wanted to show you. So this is an article I was going to make a video on today, actually. Inside China's bid to build sway over global metals pricing. This is what you talk about a lot, and they bring some good points and actually some quotes from China themselves of this plan. So China is locking in steps to shape the pricing of the vast quantities of industrial metals it produces and consumes, with moves to attract foreign firms to trade on Shanghai's future exchange, which would eventually fragment global markets. After buying mining assets around the world over the past 2 decades to secure metals needed for industrialization, and more recently to meet its carbon emissions targets, China now wants a bigger say in how prices of those metals are determined. But it has lost market share in metals futures trading and needs to persuade international investors to use the Shanghai Futures Exchange, according to interviews with more than 10 brokers. So it goes down. I want to talk. There's a quote down here, he said. So they said that the Shanghai Futures Exchange did not respond to requests for comment or to questions on timelines for the amounts available to invest in this project. The challenges it faces or how successful would be measured. However, the state media in June reported Wang Fenghai, general manager at the Shanghai Futures Exchange, saying, quote, Only through opening up can we draw in foreign investors, participate in the process of Shanghai Futures Exchange price establishment, therefore enhance price influence. They talk about cross-border delivery capability. This is a pretty big article, but I thought that was interesting that, there's conversations on the table of them trying to, set these prices themselves and use less of the Western suppression, I guess,
Well, they will
call it.
set the price ultimately themselves. And when you take the cumulative volume of the Shanghai Metals Exchange and the Futures Exchange, it's up 400-500% over the last few months and has passed the cumulative volume of the COMEX. It's number two. So when you talk about industrial metals, they bought the London Metals Exchange, so they
Yeah,
own the
that's crazy.
platform, and they're building warehouses in China to actually warehouse the metals traded in London, and they are striking deals with their Belt Road and with the BRICS all around the world, buying or developing the infrastructure for underdeveloped countries that are resource rich in these commodities, from rare earths to base metals to precious metals to soft commodities like soybean, corn, and wheat, all around the world. And as we've talked about before, the head of the new Shanghai or the BRICS grain exchange said, look, we produce and consume more than the West does, but COMEX sets the price. We don't have price setting power, but that will change with the development of the new BRICS grain exchange. They understand this. And so, yes, they understand that they don't have the price setting capability yet, but they're using the price manipulation of all of these commodities by the West, where you can set oil to -40 a barrel to accumulate them all on the cheap. And then their exchanges, which will gain legitimacy and credibility. Like, for example, if you look at the Shanghai Gold Exchange, not the futures exchange, but the gold exchange, in
Right.
order to buy like a silver bar and to trade it on the metals exchange, you have to buy a physical bar
Yep.
from one of the 6 approved refineries, who then laser inscribe a serial number on that bar that is related to the contract. And this is how you give real price discovery, or keep it authentic, if you will, at least in terms of it being rehypothecated. And so they're taking steps to install legitimacy and credibility into their platforms that will ultimately, I think, take over for the West, when the West is, look, the commercial banks are trapped. And when you have 4 to 6 billion ounces short with only 300 million ounces to deliver, how does that happen? What happens if you start getting called on the carpet? What does that look like? And when you look at the drawdown in silver, in particular, off of LBMA, off of Shanghai, and off of COMEX, where is all the silver if there's a 265 million ounce shortfall, according to the Silver Institute, which doesn't even acknowledge
Yeah.
it being in military equipment?
Or
This is a
aerospace.
game that's going to end very poorly. And I'm telling you, the commercial banks are sweating right now, and they know that.
Yeah.
So ultimately, yeah, you'll see the exchanges in China start to gain far more credibility than what will be a an exposed fraudulent Western system before it's all said and done.
Is China the only exchange where you actually have to deliver or put
To my
gold into?
knowledge, yes. I'm not positive on that. It's a good question.
Yeah,
But
that's
I do
so
know that
interesting.
that is the case with the Shanghai Metals Exchange. And I think what that is kind of directly addressing the elephant in the room, and that
Yeah.
is the rehypothecation of the Western system, without going out and saying it's a fraud, because they're using that system to game the system themselves, to go around the world buying up everything that's not nailed down. And then once they've done all of that and secured the future production and delivery and refining and all of these things, then they can say, yeah, by the way, you guys are a scam. And
Yep.
now anyone who wants legitimacy with transparency and immutability, come to our side. And you'll see very quickly that those commodity exchanges become the dominant ones across the globe, because of the legitimacy and the transparency and the ability to deliver what it is that is owed to you, rather than right now you look at COMEX, which is many hundreds of times rehypothecated. They have rules in the system. There are rules in an exchange. There aren't rules at the LBMA. There really are no rules. They're voluntary. But on COMEX, they're not voluntary. There are rules, and And those rules say in the interests of the exchange that we can cash settle you if it means the exchange is about to die. It's what they, changing the rules is what they did to the Hunt brothers. They'll change the rules here too. And when that happens, that's the same thing as a default. That's the same thing as, yeah, well, we lied and it's a scam. And well, who's going to trust us ever again? And this is what happens when you allow this type of naked shorting by the bullion banks that create an illusion and obliterate price setting or price discovery. And that's, the only reason that the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians aren't bitching about it is because they're the ones buying it all, using the stupidity of our suppression to do so until there's no longer any cookies in the cookie jar left to be delivered. And that's when you start to see these exchanges on other parts of the world gain real legitimacy for their transparency, the ability to take delivery, and for it being a straight up market the way that the Western markets should be, but aren't.
When we were, I think it was the last show with Sean, where we had Sean on, you guys were talking about the difference this time with silver's price this high is that it's also in the ETFs. 3 weeks ago, you brought this up for the first time. And then a couple days later, I interviewed Sean separately, and he also brought it up. And you guys were saying that silver ETFs are also something that is pushing a difference this time that wasn't previously. What did you mean by that?
Well, if you look since 2022, the outflows out of the Western ETFs have been stark at a 45-degree angle, like you're skiing down a mountain in Vail. And so, you talk about, in particular, gold strength with outflows out of the ETFs, a positive real yield in the 6-month treasury versus inflation. Let's not even go down the road that we think the BLS is actually BS and the CP lie is just that, a lie. But we'll take it at face value. Positive real return or positive real yield on a short-term treasury, strong dollar, and outflows out of the ETFs, and yet gold and silver have held their own. Silver's done very well, actually, percentage-wise. And now what we're seeing is reversal of that. We are beginning to see a Fed pivot, move the other way. We're beginning to see cracks in the dollar edifice. Yes, it's done better than people thought recently, but it has come down, recently, had a little bounce up here really recently, but before that, it had been falling. So a falling dollar, a Fed pivoting away from the high interest rates, lowering short-term rates, and a influx of money into the ETFs, one would expect that would translate into much higher price in silver ultimately, as you get Western participation that has really been void from any of the rally we've seen in the last 2 years. So look, I think the ETFs are the worst possible way to own silver. SLV and GLD are some of the worst financial products ever created. Read the prospectus, pages 6 through 12, titled Risk Factors. Really read it. You'll sell it. It's not a good way to own silver. It's not a good way to own gold. It's a price representation at best, and a poor one at that. But nonetheless, we are seeing more money move into that sector, as I think people understand that things are getting a little bit more concerning and serious, especially with the uncertainty with the BRICS meeting next week, with the election in 3 weeks, the massive inflation that we see not going anywhere anytime soon. And you can evidence that by the Fed dropping rates by 50 basis points with the intention of doing it again in the next meeting, and yet rates on the 10-year treasury are back up over 4% because the world's saying, you guys are full of crap. You're going to go the inflation path. You're going to reignite inflation. You're 60% away from your target, and now you're pivoting. You're not even near your target. Now you're going to pivot. That's like driving across the country. You get 40% across the country, say, we're there, and turn around and go home. It doesn't work that way. And so the world is saying, no, we want more interest if we're going to buy duration of any form of your treasuries, because you're going to inflate your way out of this problem. And so there's there's some sort of recognition already that one place to go would be gold and silver. So we're seeing an influx, I guess you could say, into the ETFs, which ultimately should be very bullish for the price, certainly more so than a outflow out of the ETFs anyway.
That's interesting.
Because when you buy an ETF, you have to buy physical silver in theory and
Yeah.
put it into the trust. So the more people that are buying SLV, the more silver has to be bought in the open market, put into the trust, which would therefore be bullish for the price.
Because I always look at different scenarios, like whether Kamala wins or Trump wins, and what this could, bring for silver's prices. Regardless, any situation I think that could happen, even not even just talking about those two, geopolitically, even like the wars and all that, every single scenario that plays out is all bullish for gold and silver, no matter what
Ultimately, it
happens.
is. Yeah. But
It's
I think
insane,
too, I think you need to manage your expectations because every single time one would expect the price to move, oftentimes it disappoints. And that's
right?
counterintuitive nature of a market that's controlled by bullion banks that want to keep the price down
Yeah,
until they can't anymore. And that's why it's one of these deals you think in terms of fundamentals and inevitability. You
yeah,
look at the big picture. See, what you just
yeah,
said right there is focusing on the ugliness of the trees rather than on the big
yeah,
picture of the beautiful forest. Look at the forest, and the forest says ultimately that's where we end up. But to, some people sell the news type of thing where one would expect it, therefore they sell or short. Um, Manage your expectations and understand that, this is the long game. If you have the
yeah,
luxury of playing it, you'll be right. If you're focusing on an event to trigger that price, you might be right, but you could also very well be disappointed, which only triggers more emotions that keep you from seeing the big picture. So
mm,
just know that the genie's out of the bottle. We're moving in that direction. Whichever president wins, they're both talking a weak dollar and low interest rates. They're both saying the best possible thing you could say for
right,
gold and silver. And Kamala Harris would probably be much greater in the respect of her tax policy, which you got guys like John Paulson who says, I'll yank 9 billion out the day she's elected out of the market and buy gold and cash because I'd rather deal with the inflation of owning cash and the uncertainty of owning gold than being in a stock market or a bond market or any market where my gains are going to be taxed in an unrealized manner of 25% and corporate taxes go up double and as do the capital gains taxes. So who's going to be worse? I don't know. But ultimately for the dollar, I think for the country, it's by far it's Kamala if she wins. But for the dollar, I think they're both bad. And that bodes well for the price of gold and silver over the last year since 2022. And anytime there's weakness, you see the price go right back up. That's the central bank's buying. And I think ultimately gold and silver and oil and copper and commodities are being revalued. And they're being revalued in the respect that they're worth more ultimately than the paper currency that stands behind them or is
mm,
used to purchase them. So I think, here again about emotions, what is different this time is that in most of my career, when they would step on the price, they would break its neck and it wouldn't even come back anywhere near that vicinity for a long time. And now it's like they knock it down and it comes right back up. That's tremendous strength that the insiders are using the suppression of the market against us. They're like, fine, go ahead, be stupid, knock it down. Here we are. We'll buy some more. Thank you. And that's a very, very difficult thing to combat because the only tool they have is to continue to suppress it and knock it down, build up their short positions in a paper market where deliverable metal, especially, deliverable metal is part of the deal. And if they don't have the metal to deliver, what happens? What happens to a big commercial bank who has obligations in every single form of finance, not just metals and interest rates and banking and other commodities and everything else they do? If they default on one end of their obligations, do you think that's only gonna you think everything else they have will be immune to the rush to run away from that bank? No, it will bring down the ecosystem. Bank of America is the one I've been saying forever. I think they're going to sacrifice. And if in a world where you're trying to cull the banks and move to a CBDC, you got to get rid of a lot of the banks. How do you do that? Bring down a biggie like Bank of America, and watch what happens. Everyone will run to yank their money out, and it'll jack the price of commodities way higher. It'll blow up the banks. It will create a panic moment where now is the time for the CBDC to be rolled in on a white horse. Just take it and we'll make you whole. I know you lost everything, but that's what a CBDC is. It's modern monetary theory. We don't even have to collect taxes if we don't want to, but we can just print your way to prosperity. So
mm.
I think they're going that way. If you look at the GDP of the world and take the countries that make 99% of it, they all have a CBDC in development or operation. It's coming. They don't do that just for shits and giggles. It's coming. How do you get there? You create an event, you blow up the banks, you call the banks, because now you have a handful of banks that can do mortgages and trades and loans, and but you have a much easier pathway to issuing a CBDC through 5 or 10 big commercial banks than you do through uh, you know, 5,000 banks, regional and local banks that will be just obliterated as everyone yanks their money out looking for a safe haven place to put it. That's when you see gold and silver become unobtainium. Now, could this stuff happen? Yeah, why not? To think that it can't is foolish, looking at what we see
Right.
in front of us. So will it happen? Don't know. But in a world of no guarantees and only probabilities, I think there's a decent probability that something like that happens. And, Powell said, I told you, he'll say, I told you, I said
Yeah.
there's going to be consolidations. And you look at Bank of America, why is Buffett pulling all his money out of it? Why? And is it coincidental that they hold the big short positions in gold and silver? I don't think so. So I guess we'll ultimately see, but that's been my call for a while now. I think that is the one that they'll let drop, and you drop that and let it get bailed in, and all of a sudden you have everything you need through chaos and panic to roll out a CBDC on a white horse.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Warren Buffett because he's one of the most bullish people on silver specifically, right? Like he doesn't touch gold with the 10-foot pole. And that's a quote that he actually used himself. He's very interesting. Looking at all these different billionaires that invest into silver, like Jim Rogers, I mean, there's so many. But Warren Buffett, the fact that he specifically chooses silver, I always thought that was pretty interesting. Um, but
Well, he's a
going back,
value
like,
investor. That's his whole thing.
yeah,
He's the greatest value investor ever. And John Paulson, who's got 9 billion in the market, says he'll buy gold. Well, maybe he means silver too. But when you look at a guy who prides himself at being the world's most um, the biggest value investor of all time, well, put the words together. Silver is the greatest value of all
right,
time. So I'm sure he probably sees it for what it is. And
yeah.
there's rumor, I don't know if it's true, that when they created SLV, he was the one who sold all the silver to fund it to SLV for some reason. They basically twisted
Mm,
his arm. I don't remember the story, but he owned all the silver, and he was sold it for some reason. Who knows at that level what kind of deals are made, but it was his initial stockpile that funded SLV. There's an article out there that talks about that somewhere.
mm. And reverting back to what you were talking about with the manipulation, it reminded me a lot of Ted Butler and his work of how they can try to manipulate the price or, suppress it as much as they want, but inevitably you cannot overpower the fundamentals of something that has intrinsic value like silver, right? And I do think that day and age is coming. I mean, Ted dedicated his entire life to, exposing this stuff, and every time you were talking about that, it did remind me of his whole point was that it will happen eventually. That there is there isn't this, forever suppression where they could just keep pulling this off. You can't with something, especially that's as scarce as silver, right? Even if silver wasn't scarce, I would still be investing into it. But the fact that there's also this shortage just pushes things to a whole other level, which kind of puts it in this separate category than gold, even though I still do think they're both still great things to park your money in. But, yeah, Ted Butler is definitely someone, if you guys don't know or have never looked into his stuff, I definitely would look into his research because he has dug into COMEX suppression, manipulation, corruption more than anyone else that I've ever seen. But yeah,
I
so
don't I don't know how easy it is to find his work anymore. Unfortunately, he passed away, but
yeah,
I'm sure there's a lot
but
of articles out there that
yeah, there's
will
still, yeah,
reference all of this. But yeah, he's missed, and the
yeah,
closest thing to him now would be Ed Steer, who kind of picked up the pieces, although there's really no one quite like Ted. I also
yeah,
think that Craig Hemke, the TF Metals report, is someone who understands the COMEX market as well as anybody. Would recommend people check his website out too, TF Metals. But yeah, it's there's no question that because of the distortions and the lack of price discovery and the paper trading at holding massive amounts of silver short naked on paper with nowhere near enough metal to be able to come up with to deliver on top of a structural supply deficit, which is lying to some degree when it omits things like military. There has never been a asset that has the value that silver does, and that line aligns perfectly with Warren Buffett. Maybe that's why Bank of America has gone to such great lengths to massive degrees of manipulation. A billion ounces, Ted thought that they had short before he died. That by other analysts' appraisal has not been sold off yet, has not been covered. So when you have a billion ounces short by a bank like Bank of America in an asset that is the greatest value that is being depleted across the globe and accumulated by many of the countries in the Southern Hemisphere, it's about as dumb as a mud wall to have that position. Maybe Warren knows this. So who knows? A lot of maybes, but yeah, ultimately, I think that's probably why he's turned on by silver, because his whole mantra is value.
Yeah, that's interesting. It really is like follow the money. The biggest, most powerful countries, or I guess the shift, the most wealthy investors, central banks, all of these people are focusing on precious metals. Like you say, price is the greatest tool of misdirection.
It is.
If there's no point in it, then why are all these people accumulating so much of it? So yeah, there's this client of mine. She said she just started a couple weeks ago, like a couple months ago, whatever. Has like 300 ounces of silver, and she's like, I know that's nothing. I know I don't have. I was like, if you want to be technical, you have 300 ounces. You're one of the wealthiest people in the world right now. I mean, 0.5% invests precious metals. We determine wealth off of how much gold a country has, or to some extent, not how many dollars they print. So to be honest, like you having 300 ounces of silver is wealthier than almost everyone on this earth. Like just if you look at it from a realistic perspective, from that nature. So
Well,
yeah,
I would tell that person to keep on keeping on. I
yeah,
mean, buy when you can. If it's 1 or 2
yeah,
ounces every week, do what you can.
yeah,
And it's like anything where, being repetitive and methodical ultimately lead to great results. It's the law of compounding, not just compounding of interest, compounding of time and of effort and of ounces. Over
yeah,
time, it ends up being a much larger position. And, you do the best you can. There are a lot of people who don't have any gold and silver, most people. And
yeah,
in a world where you're fully invested in a currency that is 260 trillion in the red, um, you know, ultimately what happens to the value of that currency? Well, it's obviously kind of mathematically inevitable that it trends towards its inherent value of worthlessness, the way that all
yeah,
paper currencies have since the beginning of time. Dr. Franz Pick used to say all paper currencies inherently are meant to die. And that too will happen to this system, which will be replaced by a system that addresses that. And that will be one of probably blockchain technology meshing with commodities. And,
mm,
I think that you do the best you can as often as you can, and that's the best you can do. But at least you did something. And,
yeah,
it's better than giving up. It's better that you just keep on trying. It's like you're swimming and you can see the land. It's way out there. You can either keep going or you give up and sink. And that's up to you. But I think you do the best you can. And that's all you can do. You keep trying and you don't give up, and you never know what tomorrow brings.
yep. Every 2 weeks, I've actually, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't do that for a while, but I actually started doing that again. Every 2 weeks, I'll buy something, even if it's
Your
only
daughter
like
will thank
10.
you someday.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, and she will. And imagine if she had bought. Now, just imagine she was left with a bunch of money when she was born. Your grandfather said, here's $1 million for your daughter. And every 2 weeks, she had been buying something, or you did it on her behalf since she was born.
right.
Already at however old she is, 7 or 8 years
She's
old.
4, but
Four. Well, okay.
still,
So four times. you know, 26 times 4 is what? 80 and 104. So 104 purchases in 4 years. So, what's that when she's 40? That's
Right.
what, 1,400 purchases
Yeah.
or
That's
whatever. The point of it is that you keep doing that, and that's how you get out of the rat race. That's how you get strong if you go to the gym. That's how you lose weight if you diet. That's how you do anything to be good at it. What do they say? 10,000 times to be a pro or an expert at something. It's just saying the same thing. It's using the laws of compounding of time, of effort, of energy, of money, of interest, whatever you're using as your metric, as your denominator, so be it. But in
yeah.
anything, it's about compounding. And the same thing is true about this. And I'm huge into it because it's the best gift my dad ever gave me. Made me buy something every 2 weeks, and I've honored that promise to him. I have, and even though I don't have to, I have, and I've never looked back. And it gives you freedom, gives your family freedom ultimately, and um, it's just the way to go about doing things like this, in my opinion.
A lot of my clients go by that as well. Like I'll have clients like Andy says every 2 weeks. Like they
Well,
like
you know
listen to
what? You
you.
do it at the end of the year. You look at, holy crap, look what I
Yeah.
got. and
Yep.
that and that's just the way that it is. You go to a gym after New Year's and it's filled, a health club. It's
Yeah.
filled with the
Right.
resolutions. You come
Yeah.
there a month later and it's a third of what it was because they all drop out.
Yeah.
But at the end of the year, if you were one of the few that stuck into it and you look at yourself in the mirror, you're like, wow, man, my arms are big and I've lost weight. I've toned. That it was incredible. You wouldn't notice it in a month or maybe even two.
Right.
Maybe you start to see it in three. And then four, you're like, wow, this is adding up. And then five, yeah, man. And then six, let's go. And you keep going. And
Yeah.
that's the only way to get ahead. No one does it for you. You have to speak to your future self and say, dude, take care of us down the road. If you don't, and it doesn't have to be in gold and silver. For me, that's my preferred way of doing it. It could be in anything that you feel
Yeah.
is the best way to take care of your future. You do it in a methodical and regimented fashion. You prioritize your future self first. Ain't no one else going to do it for you. And look at what's happening to Social Security. It's being eviscerated. Look what's happening to Medicare and Medicaid. It's being eviscerated. If you don't prioritize your future self, you'll be sorry. And I think that's the truest statement I can give. And there's nothing better than looking back at yourself and saying, I was smart enough to know that I had to do this. And
Yeah.
it's a good feeling, whether it be about working out and being strong as hell a year or two later, or taking care of your daughter and yourself and your future by knowing that ultimately time comes, catches us all. And, I still feel like I'm 21 years old. I'm 40, 53, 54. And I just turned 54 and I don't feel it in my head, but it happens. It's like, where did that time go, man? I still remember like yesterday playing high school baseball, right? I mean, like, where did that time go? I
Yeah.
remember playing Little League. Where did it go? And it does. It catches us all. So prioritize yourself. And that's the best advice I can give anybody ever. Doesn't matter how much money you make or you earn. I don't care if you earn 35,000 a year. You have enough money to buy an ounce of silver a week or to put
Yeah.
$10 in a jar a week. And you have to, if it means giving up something today to prioritize tomorrow, well, that's what it means. But figure out a way to do it, or you'll end up being in the same position, only worse off forever. And those are the
Yeah.
people, unfortunately, at 80 years old, you see at the grocery store bagging groceries, your heart goes out to them. And maybe they're doing it just because they're bored. Okay. But some of them aren't. And they're doing it because they didn't prioritize. Well, you look at people, most people don't have much more than 50 or 60 or 70 grand for retirement. That ain't enough. And you better start now or yesterday if you could. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's sound advice.
Yeah. And folks, if you wanted to purchase any of this shiny stuff, I got you. I'll take care of you. You can email me, slayer@milesfranklin.com, or call me 330-485-6172. I've already got about 3 missed calls since we did this 45 minutes. I'm going to call them back. So make sure you guys, hit me up if you want. I'm not stingy. I promise I will take care of you. And, we have a huge inventory. We have a massive inventory. It's honestly impressive. So yeah, I'll send you a price sheet, whatever. Just, even if you just want to look around, just build relationships. Yeah, hit me up. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Make sure to subscribe because I post daily videos. So yeah, Andy, any last words you want to say before we head off?
Yeah, no, that's about it, my man. It's going to be a crazy. I mean, I think over
Yeah.
the next few weeks, our shows should be more and more interesting with the BRICS
Oh
meeting
yeah.
next week, the election in 3, and this is as suspenseful as it gets. I don't know that we're going to see anything that will immediately validate all of the things we talk about, but I think it's a increasing and accelerating progression of events that demand our attention and could very well change the backdrop of everything in this country ultimately. So stay tuned, and I look forward to
Yeah.
riding shotgun with you, as I've said all along, and talking about the way these things impact the silver and gold market and life in general. And couldn't think of anyone I'd rather do it with than you. I do have another live stream tonight. If anyone is able to
Yeah,
jump
I'll
on
share.
if
I
we
share
post
every
this.
one. I share every
And
one.
I got some really interesting guests coming on in the future. Tavi Costa, Johnny Bravo, one of the most interesting dudes of all time. I'm doing a guy named Ian Eagle tomorrow. Ian Eagle is a sports announcer. He does the Final
Oh
Four. He'll
wow.
do the Super Bowl, the World Series. Is a fascinating guy, um, and more about what makes them tick. Not so much about the economy. How'd
Yeah,
you get to where you are?
that's
That's just the
cool.
beginning.
Yeah,
I have a list of
that's cool.
people, and you're going to be on it, and lots of people. So,
Yeah,
anyways, every Tuesday night is the live stream Q&A. You want to jump in tonight? We'd love to have you jump on.
yeah.
I'll send you a
It's
link if you
so.
want. But
Yeah,
other than that, we're going to be doing 2 or 3 guests a week moving forward, and so I can be on the other side of the your side of the
yeah.
camera. But I still love doing these with you and others, and so I do 15, 20, 25 of these a week. It's my passion. It's what I love. And I'm trying my best to get the word out. So, but you're one of my all-time favorites to do it with. You get it, and you're young, and I know you're helping lots of people of all ages, but you reawakened my belief that this is not just for old people anymore. I once thought that the younger generation would
I think
ignore
it.
all
It
of
still
this.
is. It
Well,
still
it
is.
is.
I just
You know.
might be a one-off or something.
Well, yeah, I
But,
don't think you're an outlier. I do think you're special, but I think there are a lot of people your age that resonate with you. And so, whatever, it's a privilege.
yeah,
And I keep telling you, get down here to Florida. I'm buying your plane ticket. Get down here and let's do a podcast in person.
yeah,
But in the
yeah.
meantime, I will let you run, and I look forward to seeing you soon, man.
Yeah, I do want to mention I appreciate on your live stream how you were talking about me and just like how just saying all those nice things. Like it was different because it's not on my channel. You were saying that on your own channel in front of
But
like
I mean
your
it.
audience.
I
It
mean
was
it.
just
I
it was
mean,
just cool to
I'm not full of
I
shit. I
know.
mean all of that. And
Yeah.
look,
I just
very
appreciated
few
that, but
people who represent my company as a outside representative. You do. There's only 3 or 4 or 5 that do, and you do, and that's something that I take very seriously, and I couldn't be more honored to say that that's the case. So for what
right.
it's worth, I mean every bit of it and more. So, but I'm still
Yeah.
serious. I can't think of a better excuse to write off a plane ticket for business
Yeah.
purposes than to have you come down here and hang
Yeah.
out for a couple nights and do a couple live streams with me,
Yeah.
and get Q&As and the whole 9 yards. And
Yeah.
so the invitation stands, my man.
All right. Yeah, I really do love watching your lives, and every time I share them, like I see like your live stream viewer count bump like 300 viewers. Like my audience loves you, so it's really cool that that you're doing this now. So yeah, but
Tonight at
anyways,
eight
yeah,
o'clock. So
yeah,
I think it's 8. Anyways, yeah, man, I'll see
yeah.
you soon, maybe on tonight's live stream, and stay well, brother.
All right,
Talk real soon.
all right, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Silver Slayer. I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace.